5 things that you can do to help make your crossbow limbs last a little bit longer. That is this episode of Death by Bunjie. Welcome to the final episode of our Breaking Limbs series here on Death by Bunjie. 4-part series, 4 episodes, all about breaking limbs on crossbows and how to prevent it, right? That's what we're really after here. The number one way that we can start making our crossbows a little bit more efficient is by adding weight to our arrows. I just got done doing a whole episode on that. Go check out episode 3 of the Breaking Limbs series here on Death by Bunjie. Adding a little bit more weight makes your crossbow efficient because it slows the arrow down. While that arrow is going down the rail after you pull the trigger, there's a little bit more time for the string to impart energy on the arrow. More kinetic energy in the arrow means less kinetic energy left over, and that means greater efficiency. Less kinetic energy left over to do damage.
I don't like 350 grains. I think it's stupid to go that light. Is it going to blow the bow up? Probably not. Is it going to reduce your longevity of the bow? Probably.
Going with a really, really heavy arrow doesn't increase your efficiency from 30% up to 60% or anything like that. It's going to be more like a 4% increase. I know there was a comment, and this is true, that going from 40% to 44%, technically that's a 10% increase in efficiency because 4%, that increase, is 10% of 40%. I'm not going to get all technical like that, but I do like the idea of going from 40 to 44%. Or maybe 40 to 41% or 42%. Every little percentage point that you can add to your efficiency is going to help you save your limbs. When you use the online calculators on deathbybunjie.com, the math you get there is accurate. That is the actual accurate numbers. So you put in good numbers, you'll get good results.
They really need to be about 4 to 425, 450 grains total weight to make it a solid, reliable, consistent bow.
Just start by getting in the 400s, right? Get somewhere between 400 and 450.
If you're buy a bow that shoots 400 feet per second with a 380 grain arrow, and you can purchase a 425 grain arrow, yeah, you're not going to shoot 400 feet per second. But good God, man, that's a 400 some grain arrow still flying 375 feet per second.
That might only increase your kinetic energy going into the arrow by a little bit. It might only increase your efficiency by a percentage. But that's every time you pull the trigger. Run the numbers, shoot in the backyard as you prepare for this upcoming crossbow season, and see how you make out. Number 2 way that you can help save your limbs. In my book, I confessed that I don't shoot an awful lot. I don't really like to shoot an awful lot. I'm a crossbow hunter. One of the reasons I got into crossbows instead of compound bows, instead of traditional archery, is because I don't like to spend all that much time in the backyard shooting. I don't want to spend hours every day shooting. I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time out there doing thousands of shots in preparation of going out and hunting. I like crossbows because I don't have to do that.
That's one of the biggest problems we have is people don't use their bows.
It made sense to me back in the day that shooting your crossbow an awful lot is actually a bad idea. Every time I pull that trigger, there's all this vibration, all this energy left over in the crossbow that is going to damage the crossbow if you shoot it too much. That made sense to me.
Composites, carbon fiber, fiberglass, these sort of things, they're very difficult to make perfectly consistent, and it's just because of the way that they're made. So with fiberglass, you'll have your glass, a layer of glass. Typically, they'll try to get them all lined up in the same direction, the little glass fibers, and then they'll put resin on it, and then they'll repeat that to make it to the width that they want or the thickness they want.
I called up Gordon Glass one time. How do you test these limbs? You know, what are you doing? He says, oh, well, we'll go through and we'll build limbs. We'll pull random ones out. We'll throw them through a cycle machine. And we'll cycle them for like 10,000 cycles. And then we'll test to see what the reduction in pull is and stuff like that. I said, okay. I said, so what you're doing is you're taking a brand new limb out of the box and you're putting it into a vise and you're pulling it back and letting it go, pulling it back and letting it go. Okay, great. I said, that's not how people shoot crossbows. He's like, what? I said, well, stop and think about it. I said, if you have a vertical bow, what are you going to do? You're going to buy your bow and you're going to shoot how many hundreds of arrows before you ever consider taking it out into the woods. And if it's not shooting, the bow is relaxed. It's under some pressure, but it's not under full draw. I said, you take your average crossbow guy, buys a brand new crossbow, takes it outside, 8, 9 shots, sights it in, and hangs on a hook in his garage until the day before hunting season. Throws an arrow down range at 30 yards, says, yep, still sight in, cocks the bow and sits in a tree for 8 hours. And I'm like, it's had maybe 6, 8, 10 shots maybe before it's sitting in the woods at full draw for 8 hours and multiple weekends in a row. And it doesn't have any time to break in.
There's a structure to the way the atoms fit together. And it basically what happens is you get individual breaks in there between the atoms.
If you take fiberglass with linear fibers, okay, and you bend it and relax it, you bend it, relax it, bend it, relax it, you're going to get cracking, okay? Those cracks, if it's bent and relaxed and bent and relaxed, do not link up. It's wearing itself in. It's like if you took a piece of wood and go, it's going to break. But if you go, you can gradually get to do it.
Between the layers over time, you get little breaks in the resin. And after a while, you get enough of those, and that load you put it under suddenly is enough to break it.
You're taking these brand new limbs, you're 6, 8 times maybe, and then you're going, and you're sitting there with it. And all these micro cracks line up. Now you get the edge splinters and the individual little things popping up. They're not breaking in the limbs. They're not allowing the things to stretch and crack and kind of work itself in. It's like buying a brand new Corvette and throwing a brick on the accelerator and going to lunch and hoping that there's an engine still there when you come back.
Now, this is Death by Bunjie. I hunt with Bunjie, the OB, the original Bunjie. The original Bunjie is a 2010 Excalibur Axiom. 12 going on 13 seasons with this crossbow. It's a giant crossbow. I've got to take a step back to get the wider angle lens so we can fit it all on the screen. I don't really measure the lifespan of a crossbow in terms of shots. I don't keep track of the number of shots. I have no interest in the number of shots that I've taken. I keep track of the lifespan of my crossbow in terms of the number of seasons that I've hunted with it. And 12 seasons, now going on 13. Bunjie is ready right now to go out and kill another bear. But when you see your crossbow like Bunjie Jr. failing after 600 or so shots, all of a sudden you start paying attention to the number of shots. I was shocked when I read on Facebook about a fellow who was shooting his crossbow and had thousands of shots, not hundreds, but thousands of shots on his crossbow. What is that person's secret? I reached out to Matt Miller on Facebook, and I thank him for taking the time to talk to me.
You had a post where you had shot one of your missions, at least one of them in particular, an awful lot. Can you tell me about that?
My 2018 sub 1 has right now over 25,000 shots on it.
Man.
At 20,000, I changed the limbs.
20,000 shots.
They weren't broke. They weren't splintered. My brain just went, man, these things have got to be tired. You know what I mean? They just have to be.
Had you noticed any difference in performance at 20,000 shots?
Nope.
So, and you're chronoing this crossbow somewhat regularly if you're trying to qualify for these competitions, it sounds like. Were they still performing at the speed you would have expected?
Yeah. When
Wow.
I put the new limbs on, it was no more than 4 or 5 clicks on the scope, and away we go.
How does somebody get 20,000 shots out of a set of crossbow limbs when Bunjie Jr. couldn't manage 1,000? He must shoot really, really heavy arrows in order to get that many shots out of his crossbow, right?
What arrow weights are you shooting typically?
460 grains.
Total arrow weight.
Yep, total arrow weight.
Arrows?
IPO has a rule of a minimum of a 450 grain arrow.
Oh, okay.
So what I did is I went and I built as close to that weight as I could without ever being concerned about a scale variance, you know what I mean, going somewhere and getting disqualified because you're 2 grains too light. So my goal was a 455 through a 460-ish grain arrow. The build I came up with comes in right at 460 grains, and I shoot that same arrow out of both my Sub 1 and my Sub 1 XR.
Notice that Matt Miller is choosing his arrow weight based on his competition requirements, not for limb life, right? I mentioned in the previous video, one of the reasons I like to pick arrow weight really has more to do with my hunting goals. I am a crossbow hunter first and foremost, and I think we need to really, really focus on your goals as a crossbow hunter in choosing your arrow weight. I actually ran the advertised specs for Matt Miller's Sub 1 XR, the Mission Sub 1 XR, through the crossbow efficiency calculator on deathbybungie.com. His crossbow really is only 42% efficient based on those numbers. Now, he's dialed his draw weight back a little bit, right? Ratcheted out those limbs a little bit. The Sub 1 XR is a really neat crossbow that allows you to do that. That will in turn reduce his speed a little bit. Increasing the arrow weight, though, isn't going to increase you from 1,000 shots to 20,000 shots, right? It's not going to make that kind of difference. It's going to improve the efficiency overall and make a little bit of a difference. Everything we're talking about here is going to make a little bit of a difference. And hopefully they all add up to making a big difference. But that alone can't explain getting 20,000 shots out of his crossbow without even really needing to change the limbs.
I average 7,000 to 10,000 shots a season.
Life is easy. I said life is easy. Life is so easy. Life is easy. Don't make it hard.
The number 3 way to help improve your limb life. Matt Miller, 20,000 shots. What's his explanation for all the breaking limbs that we see on Facebook and on YouTube?
I hate to chime in with the manufacturers, but I think a lot of it is user error.
Avoid user error. How about that one, right? It seems like common sense, but we can all learn something from this one. Use the correct knock. And by correct knock, I mean one that is recommended by your manufacturer. Ideally, the one that came with it. Now, certain manufacturers in the modern crossbow era have had trouble with knocks. As crossbows get smaller and more powerful, the knocks have to change to accommodate that, right? Stay up to date with the recommended knock for your crossbow. Use the correct string. Certain manufacturers actually void your warranty if you use a different string. Strings, as crossbows get more and more high-end, more high performance, the string becomes more and more important. The serving diameter becomes very, very important because it won't accommodate certain knocks. You start changing that stuff up and you're asking for trouble. I can tell you with the original Bunjie even, a flat knock crossbow, very wide limbs, shooting at 305 feet per second on a good day, that crossbow performs better with a string from Excalibur than it does with a string from anybody else. At least any of the other ones I've tried. I bought strings from other providers, people who make strings. I bought them on eBay. I bought them from other companies. They don't work as good as the one that comes from Excalibur. It's just the way it is, all right? I'm not going to try and fight that. I'm just going to use the one that came with it. That's what I'm going to use. Don't leave your crossbow cocked just so you can stretch the string overnight. Don't do that. If your crossbow manual says don't leave it cocked for more than 4 hours, don't leave it cocked for more than 4 hours. And don't dry fire your crossbow. The number 4 way to help save your limbs, help your crossbow limbs last a little bit longer, impulse theory. You weren't expecting that one, were you? That's fine. I wasn't either. I learned a lot in my talk with Darren Cummings, and he explained to me what impulse theory is and how that affects us as crossbow hunters.
The longer you give it to vibrate and to dissipate that energy, the less load is placed under and the less fatigue it's going to feel. If you've ever shot a single shot shotgun versus a semi-automatic shotgun, it doesn't feel like that semi-automatic kicks you anywhere near as hard. The main reason for that is that impulse. And impulse is important because it takes the time domain into consideration. So that single shot, when you fire it, all that energy is released into your shoulder very quickly. But with that semi-automatic, what's going to happen is it's going to absorb it over time. So what you're feeling, you're still absorbing all the energy, but you're doing it over a longer period of time.
It is all going into your shoulder all at once. It's going into your shoulder a little slower, and over that time, it's dissipating the same amount of force, but it feels like less.
That's important because when we're talking about the limbs on the crossbow, they have to absorb all that energy, and the amount of time you give them to do it is going to determine the amount of stress, the amount of load that it's placed under at any given time. So if you could take all that load that it's being put under and make it happen over a longer time, there'd be less fatigue basically to the material of the limbs.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? A whole bunch of energy remaining in the crossbow, trying to do damage. That's going to do a little bit less damage, perhaps, if you spread that vibration out over a little bit longer period of time.
The failure that you can get from a single event, right? Let's not even considering fatigue. You have a brand new bow, you take it out and shoot it, limb comes back, it's cocked, and someone's in a tree stand, and that limb whacks a very hard object, typically the tree you're in, right? And that limb explodes. Now you might be thinking, right, but I put that energy into the bolt. The bolt still went. Why did that limb explode? Well, it's because that leftover 50, 60% of energy that has to get rid of, it can't vibrate it away. It's literally got to put it right instantly into that tree. That limb smacks that tree really hard. All that energy gets dissipated in a millisecond. And that's a huge load to put on for a limb to be put under.
I had one customer, he says, "Oh, my limb split." And I'm like, yeah, the dent in the middle of it's an indicator that it wasn't that bad. You know,
probably the biggest culprit for the most failures, or let's say pushing that stress up closer to the ultimate failure point, has to be the string stops. And the reason for that, we had talked earlier, what happens if your limb whacks against a tree? It's got to dissipate all that energy very quickly. Now, when you have a string stop, it's effectively doing the same sort of thing. So what you're doing is that the string stop is connected typically to the riser, to some other part of the bow. And what you want to do is take the energy from the limb, put it through that elastomer, the rubber, because that'll help quiet it too. It'll help dissipate a bit of that energy and push it into the riser very quickly. So when that string comes forward and smacks that, it's the same sort of thing. Now it's rubber, so it's got a little give to it. It's not as bad as hitting a completely solid tree, but it's definitely got to be pushing the stress up on those limbs, because it's now, instead of vibrating to dissipate that energy over time, it's pushing it into the riser very quick.
Having the string rest completely up against those bumpers stops it immediately.
All that energy needs to be transferred, and it puts a high load on that limb for a very short period of time.
This crossbow, you can see I got a good gap here. Nice gap between the string bumpers and the string.
So what that'll do is when it comes forward, you have your string come forward, and let's say this is where it would normally stop at. It's going to go past that, right? Just because it's got so much momentum, it's going to hit that, impart some of that energy into the rest of the bow, and then it's going to come back and vibrate a little bit.
Bunjie Jr., I can see the string has crept a little bit. We're going to have to tighten it up. We'll put the stretcher on here and we'll put another twist in the string or so. It hasn't been shot in a while, and that brace height has shrunk down a little bit, hasn't it? It's almost resting immediately on those bumpers. So we're going to put a couple twists maybe into the string and pull that back to about 2 credit card widths.
And it's up to every person to make that decision. You're the one that paid the money to buy that piece of equipment. I would recommend, though, leaving at least, a 16th, maybe up to a 1/4 inch between where the string naturally wants to stop and where that piece of rubber starts for the string stop, to give it so that it dissipates quite a bit of that energy, but not all of it right within a very short instant.
Bunjie the third here, the Scorpion Deathstalker 420. Sweet crossbow. But these are the spring-loaded string dampeners. You can see that they actually rest right against the string. There is no deviation, no gap, and there shouldn't be, because the string is actually wrapped around those string dampeners. That's by design. It allows that string not to stop immediately, but to stop over a longer period of time, because it flexes like that. Not too worried about Bunjie the third because of the way that those are set up, because they're spring loaded. But I can tell you, as for Bunjie and Bunjie Junior, we have changed the brace height, and we're going to keep an eye on that on both of those crossbows. The number 5 way to help save your crossbow limbs and make your crossbow hunting life a little bit better is to stay off of social media.
And the other thing that happens on social media is the dogpile effect, where you put yours out there and everyone's like, hey, mine did that too. So
somebody posts a picture of their broken limb. Lots of times they also post that on Facebook and another page where you're also following it. And all of a sudden in our minds, it becomes 2 broken limbs, not just 1. And then before you know it, other people are piling in. They're telling you about the broken limbs. And before you know it, a single event turns into multiple events, right? The only way for us to handle that is to sort of keep that in perspective. The reality is there is a limit to the number, the percentage of crossbow limbs that are actually breaking out there. Hopefully, this video series helps us keep those numbers down. How about that? Try to end this on a positive note. And I hope that you've enjoyed this video series from Death by Bunjie. Thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned for more Death by Bunjie action as we move forward throughout the summer here. It's going to be warm soon. We're going to be back in the backyard, and we'll get ready for the fall, for the crossbow seasons. And Crossbow Appreciation Month. Ooh, in August. That's going to be awesome. Thank you. And until next time, all hail Bunjie. There you go, Fred. What do you think here, buddy?